"Help me, I can't breathe," she cried. But when Vampire King lifted the cloth, he turned pale. Once a jewel of the kingdom, it had become a place feared even by the bravest of travelers. Its towers leaned like weary giants, and the wind carried echoes of old curses. Among these shadows, the name of Kaelin, the Vampire King, was spoken with both reverence and terror. Kaelin's palace rose above the city like a dark crown. Black stone spires pierced the sky, and the windows glimmered faintly, reflecting the pale moonlight. He had ruled Ashendrel for centuries, feared by enemies and subjects alike. Yet no matter the power he wielded, there was a hollow in him, an emptiness that even time could not fill. Centuries of bloodshed, diplomacy, and solitude had shaped him into a king of unmatched strength, but one who knew nothing of warmth or trust. It was on a night thick with storm clouds and the scent of rain that the scream came. It was faint, but it carried over the empty streets and through the howling wind, reaching Kaelin's ears even in the heart of his palace. The sound was desperate, fragile, and human. He did not hesitate. He moved through the city like a shadow himself, his cloak trailing silently over broken stones. The scream guided him to a crumbling tower on the outskirts of Ashendrel. Lightning cut across the sky, illuminating the figure of a woman bound in chains, kneeling on the cold floor. Her chest heaved violently as she gasped for air, and her small hands clawed at the ropes that held her. "Help me, I can't breathe," she cried, her voice trembling with pain and fear. Kaelin's heart, so long untouched by mercy, clenched at her words. He stepped forward, his presence commanding yet strangely gentle. With a swift movement, he shattered the chains that bound her. The ropes fell to the floor with a dull thud, and the woman collapsed into his arms. Her face was partially covered with a thin, soot-stained cloth. Hesitating only for a moment, Kaelin lifted it, revealing features both beautiful and fragile. Her eyes were wide, dark pools of terror and confusion. And then he saw it, the mark that caused him to pale. It was a curse, ancient and potent, unlike any he had ever encountered. A faint, shimmering sigil glowed upon her collarbone, pulsing with a rhythm that seemed almost alive. Magic like this could suffocate, drain life, and twist destiny. Kaelin's long experience with dark forces had taught him caution, but for some reason he could not pull away. "Who did this to you?" he asked, his voice low and commanding. I don't know," she whispered, shivering. "I woke up and they were here. The magic, it burns, I can't breathe." Kaelin examined the sigil carefully. It seemed linked not only to her life but to something far older, something tied to his own lineage. He had fought countless enemies, faced betrayals, and survived wars that should have broken him. But this unknown magic unsettled him deeply. He could feel its pull, a dangerous mix of power and vulnerability, and he realized with a start that he could not ignore it. He swept his cloak around them both and carried her into the safety of his carriage. The city outside seemed smaller, more fragile, as if the storm itself recognized the importance of this moment. She clung to him weakly, and for the first time in centuries, Kaelin felt the weight of human fragility pressing against his immortality. In the palace, the halls were silent. Shadows stretched across the marble floors, and the flickering torchlight cast strange shapes upon the walls. Kaelin laid her upon a soft divan in a secluded chamber, one usually reserved for solitude and reflection. He studied her, noting the way her chest rose and fell, the delicate tremor in her hands, the faint sheen of sweat on her brow. She was alive, but barely. "I will remove this curse," he said softly, almost to himself. "I will not allow you to die here." She looked up at him, fear and hope warring in her gaze. You would help me." Kaelin's eyes softened, though only slightly. Compassion was not a feeling he often indulged. "Yes, you are in my care now. No harm will touch you while I stand here." The night deepened. Thunder rolled across the sky, but within the chamber there was a fragile stillness. Kaelin worked carefully, calling upon ancient wards and protective spells. He did not rush, knowing that haste could trigger the curse's reaction. As he whispered the incantations, the sigil pulsed faster, responding to his presence. The magic recoiled, striking him in the chest with a force that stole his breath. Even Kaelin, unyielding and eternal, stumbled back, feeling pain he had not known in centuries. His hands shook, and for a fleeting moment, he feared that the curse might overwhelm him as easily as it threatened her. The woman watched him with wide eyes, her own fear momentarily forgotten as she saw vulnerability in the one who had always been untouchable. "It hurts you," she said softly. "Why do you help me?" Kaelin paused, his gaze meeting hers. For centuries no one had asked such a question, and for centuries he had given no answer. "Because I cannot ignore you. And because there is something in you I cannot resist." His voice was rough with honesty, a rare fracture in the mask of the king. Her breath hitched. "Something in me," he nodded slowly. The storm outside seemed to echo his emotions, lightning flickering through the windows as if illuminating the truth between them. "Yes, something alive, something precious, something I will protect even if it costs me everything." The hours passed as Kaelin worked to stabilize her. The sigil's glow dimmed, responding to his power, though he could feel it trying to fight back. She began to breathe more easily, though her weakness remained. She looked up at him with a mixture of awe and gratitude. I don't know how to thank you," she whispered. "You need not," he replied. "Your survival is thanks enough." But Kaelin could not ignore the knot of unease that tightened in his chest. The curse was unlike anything he had encountered. It was ancient, relentless, and it seemed personal. Its presence connected to her, yes, but also to him, to his house, to the blood that ran through his veins. He realized that saving her would not be simple. It would demand everything he had, and perhaps more than even he could give. He stood by the window, watching the storm rage, the city of Ashendrel submerged in mist and rain. The world outside was dark and dangerous, yet inside, he felt a strange, fragile light, the presence of the woman he had saved and the unspoken bond forming between them. Then, as if the night itself conspired against them, the sigil flared violently, casting the chamber in a pale, otherworldly light. Kaelin staggered, his face draining of color. The magic recoiled toward him with unexpected force, whispering ancient threats he could not fully understand. He gritted his teeth, holding his ground, but he realized with dawning horror that this curse was unlike any battle he had ever faced. It could touch him, harm him, even unmake him. Alara, sensing his distress, reached out a trembling hand. "Kaelin, what is happening?" she asked, fear and concern mingling in her voice. He looked down at her, his gaze intense, almost desperate. "The curse, it is not yours alone. It is tied to me, to my blood, to my past. Saving you may cost me more than I am willing to give." Her eyes widened. "But you are the vampire king. You can defeat anything." Kaelin shook his head, the first sign of doubt he had allowed himself in centuries. "Not this. Not alone. This is something older, darker, something that can strike even immortals." The room was silent, save for the storm outside. Yet within that silence, a fragile truth formed between them. A connection neither fully understood, a bond born of danger, fear, and the undeniable pull of something greater than themselves. As the night deepened, Kaelin remained by her side, determined to protect her despite the threat. And in that dark chamber, lit only by flickering torches and the cursed sigil's faint glow, two souls, one eternal, one mortal, stood at the edge of a fate neither could escape. Cliffhanger. Suddenly, the sigil pulsed brighter than ever, flaring with a searing light that filled the room. Kaelin's knees buckled, his hand clutching his chest, as he realized saving her might cost him his very life. And in that moment, he understood that this night was only the beginning of a story neither of them could yet imagine. The first light of dawn barely touched the edges of Ashendrel, filtered through heavy storm clouds that still lingered from the night's tempest. Within the obsidian walls of Kaelin's palace, The darkness seemed almost protective, a sanctuary for the strange and fragile bond forming between the vampire king and the woman he had saved. Alara lay wrapped in soft blankets in a secluded chamber, her chest still rising and falling in shallow breaths. Though the curse had weakened, its presence lingered like a shadow at the edges of her life. She stared at the ceiling, thoughts spinning with fear, confusion, and the memory of Kaelin's pale face in the midst of the sigil's flare. She had never known a world like this, a world of immortal rulers, magic, and shadows that moved as though alive. Kaelin stood by the window, cloak brushing against the marble floor. His gaze was fixed outside, yet his thoughts remained on her. She was vulnerable, yes, but stronger than she knew. And beneath her fear, he sensed a courage that could challenge even the darkest of forces. He could not explain the pull he felt toward her. An ancient part of himself, long hidden under centuries of isolation, stirred at her presence. "Ilara," he said, his voice breaking the silence of the chamber, "you must rest. The curse has taken much from you, but your strength will grow if you allow it." She turned her head slowly, eyes filled with cautious trust. I do not know if I can rest. What if the curse returns? What if it takes me again?" Kaelin stepped closer, the shadow of the spires behind him making his form look larger, almost mythic. "Then I will face it with you," he said. "I will not let it claim you while I stand here. You are under my protection, and my will is stronger than any ordinary magic." Alara shivered, not from fear but from the weight of his words. In them she sensed a promise, ancient, unyielding, and yet personal. It was unlike any protection she had known. It was not mere power but devotion, a rare and dangerous thing in Kaelin's world. Over the following days, Kaelin taught her the subtle ways to defend herself, not with swords or shields, but with awareness, quickness, and understanding the currents of magic that ebbed and flowed through the city. She learned to sense danger in the faintest movements of shadow and wind, to anticipate the pull of curses before they could strike. Each lesson, though gentle in Kaelin's voice, carried the weight of his authority. At first, Alara resisted. She was frightened, distrustful of the vampire who had saved her but whose eyes sometimes betrayed a hunger she could not name. Yet, as the hours passed, she began to see him differently. She noticed the careful way he moved, the way he watched over her without forcing her compliance, the rare moments when his mask of eternal composure slipped, revealing fatigue, worry, and vulnerability. One evening, as rain tapped lightly against the high windows, Kaelin approached her with a small vial. "Drink this," he instructed. "It will ease the remnants of the curse." Alara hesitated, then met his eyes. There was a quiet intensity in them, a mixture of command and concern. She took the vial, hands trembling slightly, and drank. A warm sensation spread through her chest, soothing her like sunlight on cold stone. "You feel the bond forming," Kaelin said softly, almost to himself. "It is not simply magic, it is something deeper." Alara's eyes widened. "Bond? What do you mean?" He stepped closer, careful not to crowd her. "The curse touches more than your body. It reaches your soul, and in doing so, it reaches mine. I feel it in ways I have not felt in centuries. You are no ordinary woman, Alara. This connection, it is rare and dangerous." She looked down, uncertainty flickering across her face. "And if it is dangerous, what does that mean for us?" Kaelin's gaze darkened, heavy with centuries of experience and newly awakened emotion. "It means that nothing will be easy. Nothing will be simple, but we must face it together, or the curse will consume more than just you." The palace itself seemed to respond to their growing bond. Shadows moved differently, as though watching, waiting. Servants whispered behind closed doors, afraid of the intensity that surrounded the vampire king's new companion. Rival lords of the undead murmured threats in hidden corridors, sensing change and vulnerability in the king's demeanor. Yet none dared approach Kaelin while his attention was so fixed. As days passed, Alara began to understand that her life was no longer her own. She was part of a larger story, one that had been written long before she had ever drawn breath. Her family's betrayal, the ancient feud with Kalen's house, and the curse itself all pointed toward a destiny she had not chosen. And yet, despite the fear, she could not deny the pull she felt toward him, the strength beneath his cold exterior, the tenderness beneath his commanding presence. One night, under the pale light of the moon, Kalen found her wandering the palace gardens. Rain had turned the paths slick, and the air smelled of wet stone and blossoming night flowers. She had been drawn outside by the quiet, perhaps seeking solace or clarity. "Ilara," he said, voice low and steady, not wishing to startle her. She turned, startled, but did not step back. "I could not sleep," she admitted. "The curse, it is still with me even if weakened." Kalen approached, his boots silent on the wet ground. "Yes, its shadow lingers, but you are stronger than it. You will survive it as long as you do not face it alone." Their eyes met, and in that glance an unspoken understanding passed between them. There was danger, yes, but there was also trust, fragile yet undeniable. Alara realized that she had begun to rely on him, not merely for protection, but for guidance, for reassurance, for the sense that she was not alone in a world that had always sought to destroy her. Kalen reached out, brushing a strand of wet hair from her face. The touch was light, careful, yet charged with intensity. "Do not fear me," he said. "I am bound to you now as you are to me. Together, we may find a way to undo what has been done." A sudden movement in the shadows interrupted them. A figure cloaked and silent had slipped into the garden. Kalen tensed, instincts honed over centuries alert. He stepped in front of Alara, a living barrier between her and the unseen threat. "You should not be here," Kalen said, his voice calm but deadly. The figure stepped forward into the moonlight, revealing the faint glow of eyes that reflected centuries of ambition and malice. "The curse calls to more than one," the intruder said softly. "Do you not see? Saving her may doom you both." Kalen's eyes narrowed. "I will not allow that to happen," he replied, his tone final. Alara felt her pulse quicken, fear mingling with something new, excitement, awe, and the awareness that the world she had stumbled into was far larger and more dangerous than she had imagined. The intruder vanished before Kalen could strike, leaving only a whisper in the wind. "The bond will bring ruin, Vampire King. Beware." Kalen turned to Alara, his expression unreadable but serious. "You see, even those who watch from the shadows know of the bond between us. It is dangerous, and yet I cannot turn away." Alara swallowed hard. "Then we face it together," he nodded, a rare, almost human softness touching his features. "Together," he agreed. That night, as they returned to the warmth of the palace, the storm outside had passed, leaving the world washed and gleaming under moonlight. The curse still lingered, faint but present, like a heartbeat at the edge of perception. Yet for the first time, Alara felt that she was not alone, that even in the face of ancient magic, she had an ally she could trust, someone who would not abandon her, no matter the cost. And Kalen, for the first time in centuries, felt the stirrings of something more than duty or fear. He felt longing, compassion, and the faint glimmer of hope that perhaps even an immortal king could find something worth protecting beyond power and conquest. Cliffhanger: as they entered the palace, a sudden gust of wind extinguished the torches along the hall. The shadows seemed to twist and gather, whispering her name. Alara's eyes widened in alarm as Kalen stiffened, realizing that the curse, and something far older, was awakening again, more powerful and relentless than before. And he knew, with a shiver he had not felt in centuries, that the true test of their bond had only just begun. The palace of Kalen had never known such tension. Shadows lingered longer than usual, moving almost like living beings. The whispers of the intruder from the garden haunted every corridor, and Kalen's subjects, though loyal, sensed a shift in their king. He walked with a new weight upon him, the ancient vigilance of centuries tempered by concern for the woman who now occupied his thoughts. Ilara, meanwhile, had grown stronger in the days since the storm. Her breathing was steadier, the lingering effects of the curse reduced to occasional tremors and flashes of pain. She trained alongside Kalen, learning to sense magical currents and ward against minor threats. The lessons were difficult, exhausting her in ways she had never known, yet she embraced them. Every moment of shared training, every glance, every brush of hands carried a tension that neither could fully name. One evening, as twilight bled through the tall windows, the palace trembled with the first of many attacks. A rival vampire lord, sensing Kalen's growing vulnerability, struck with a small but deadly force. Dark creatures slipped through the outer defenses, their claws and fangs designed to test the limits of the king. Kalen responded with precision and power, his movements a dance of strength and centuries of practice. Yet even as he fought, his eyes continually sought Ilara. She was standing near the great hall, heart racing, ready to act if needed. Kalen had insisted she remain close but not in the midst of battle, his pride and fear of losing her warring in his mind. As he felled one of the intruders with a swift strike, he saw her gaze meet his, and for a moment time seemed suspended. She was brave, but she was also human, and the danger of this world pressed upon them both. After the attackers were driven off, Kalen returned to her side, his cloak damp with rain and sweat. "You must be careful," he said quietly, though his tone held no scolding, only concern. "This world is more dangerous than you imagine, and these are only the first of many tests." Ilara nodded, brushing a strand of damp hair from her face. "I understand," she replied softly, "but I want to help. I cannot just stand aside while danger comes to you or to us." Kalen's gaze lingered on her, his expression unreadable. She was no longer the fragile woman he had rescued. Her eyes reflected courage, determination, and a growing understanding of the forces around her. And yet the bond between them had become more than caution and survival. It had become a silent recognition, a thread of connection that neither could ignore. In the days that followed, the palace became a fortress of preparation. Kalen summoned ancient wards and protective circles, while Ilara continued to train, learning to recognize magical disturbances and anticipate the movements of shadowy enemies. Their interactions were charged with subtle intimacy, a guiding hand here, a protective stance there, each moment hinting at a growing emotional bond that neither had dared to name. But the curse remained a silent threat. Occasionally, it would flare unexpectedly, causing Ilara to lose her breath or see flashes of Kalen's past, visions of battles and betrayals she could not understand. Each time it happened, a tension built between them, fear mingling with curiosity, mistrust tempered by undeniable trust. One night, as they stood on a balcony overlooking the city, the moon casting silver across the fog, Ilara spoke softly. "Kalen, I feel it again. The curse, it is trying to touch you now. I can see shadows of pain in your past and in your present." Kalen's jaw tightened. "I know," he said quietly, "and I will endure it. I have faced many enemies, but this is different. This seeks to divide us, to make us doubt, to make us fear each other. We cannot let it succeed." She reached out, taking his hand in hers, a gesture both tentative and deliberate. "Then we face it together," she whispered. "Whatever it brings, we face it as one." Kalen's eyes softened, and for a brief moment the centuries of hardness around him seemed to melt. He pulled her slightly closer, the warmth of her presence a stark contrast to the coldness of the night air. "Together," he agreed. The days passed, each bringing new challenges. The palace became a center of intrigue as rival vampire lords attempted to manipulate the unrest. Messages of threats arrived in shadowed corridors. Spies were discovered, and plots unraveled before they could come to fruition. Through it all, Kalen remained vigilant, but now his concern extended beyond the safety of the throne to the fragile, mortal woman who had captured his attention. Then came the revelation that changed everything. Ancient tomes, long hidden in the palace archives, revealed the truth about the curse. It was designed to touch both the blood of Kalen's lineage and the soul of a mortal tied to that blood. Only one could survive the full ritual of release. The other would be consumed, either by the magic itself or by the unavoidable consequences of breaking it. Kalen's face grew pale as he read the words. Alara, sensing his distress, approached. "What is it?" she asked, fear creeping into her voice. He met her eyes, the weight of centuries pressing down on him. "The curse, it cannot be broken without a choice. One of us may not survive. We cannot face this lightly, nor alone." Her hands trembled slightly as she absorbed his words. "Then we must find another way. There has to be another way." Kalen shook his head slowly. "Perhaps there is, but every path carries risk, and we are running out of time. The magic is growing stronger, feeding on our connection, testing our resolve. If we fail," his voice faltered, revealing the first crack of vulnerability he had shown in centuries. Alara took a deep breath, steeling herself. "Then we fight, Kalen. We do not falter. If this bond is real, it will survive everything. I will not let it be destroyed, and I will not let you face it alone." He looked at her, awe and admiration warring with fear. She was no longer a woman in need of protection. She was a partner, a companion who could stand beside him even when the odds seemed impossible. And yet, the danger was real, tangible, and deadly. As night fell, the palace trembled with the stirring of old magic. Shadows moved through the halls and whispers echoed in the empty chambers. The curse was awakening fully, drawing strength from the bond between Kalen and Alara. They could feel it pressing at their minds, tugging at their hearts, testing the limits of trust and courage. Kalen held her close in the library, surrounded by ancient books and glowing wards. "Tonight," he whispered, "we may see the full measure of what we face. Be ready, Alara. The test comes, and it will not wait for comfort or fear." Alara nodded, determination firming in her expression. "I am ready," she said. "Whatever comes, we face it together." As the night deepened, the air grew thick with magic, and the chamber's torches flickered as if sensing the approach of something vast and terrible. The shadows lengthened and twisted, taking shapes that should not exist. Kalen's senses sharpened, every nerve alert, yet his focus remained on Alara. Then it came, the surge of power that had been building for days. The curse manifested as a vortex of shadow, twisting and coiling in the center of the room. It drew at them, pulling with a force that threatened to separate their minds, their hearts, and their very souls. Kalen gritted his teeth, holding her close, his own magic flaring in response. Alara reached out, her hands touching his, their combined will forming a barrier against the dark. The room trembled, the shadows clawing at their edges, but they held fast. "Do not let it divide you," Kalen growled, his voice low and fierce. "We are stronger together." Alara felt the energy of the curse pressing against her, but Kalen's presence steadied her. They locked eyes, sharing a silent vow. No matter the danger, no matter the cost, they would face it side by side. And then, with a flash of brilliant light and a wave of raw power, the vortex recoiled. For a moment, silence reigned and the chamber was calm. Both of them breathed heavily, hearts racing, bodies trembling from the strain. But Kalen knew, with a chill that sank to his bones, that this was only the beginning. The curse had tested them, yes, but it had also revealed its true nature, relentless, patient, and far older than even he had imagined. It would return, stronger, hungrier, and more insidious. Alara, sensing his thoughts, reached up to touch his face gently. "Kalen, we survived it," she said softly. "We can survive anything as long as we are together." He looked at her, his eyes shadowed with centuries of wisdom and the faintest glimmer of hope. "Perhaps," he said quietly, "but I fear what is still to come. The curse has not finished its work, and neither has fate. Cliffhanger. Outside, the storm that had seemed long past returned with sudden fury. Lightning split the sky, and a voice, cold and ancient, whispered through the palace halls. The bond you cherish will be the key or the ruin of both your lives. Kaelin's eyes widened, and Alara felt a shiver run down her spine. The true battle was coming, and they would have no choice but to face it together, or be destroyed. The storm outside raged with unmatched fury, thunder shaking the walls of Kaelin's palace and rain battering the obsidian towers. Inside, the air shimmered with magic, a force old as the world itself, drawn by the bond between Kaelin and Alara. The curse, relentless and patient, had awakened fully, testing them to the limits of strength, courage, and trust. Kaelin stood at the center of the grand hall, his cloak swirling like liquid night. Alara was beside him, steady despite the tremor of fear that ran through her chest. The air pulsed with dark energy, shadows twisting and clawing at the edges of reality. It was a test of heart, soul, and will, one that would decide the fate of both their lives. "Remember," Kaelin said, his voice low but firm, "the curse feeds on fear, doubt, and separation. You must trust me as I trust you." Alara met his gaze, her hand slipping into his. "I trust you," she whispered. "No matter what comes, I will not let go." The shadows surged, a vortex of darkness coiling around them, black tendrils reaching for body and mind. The curse sought to separate them, to make them doubt, to strip them of courage. Alara's breath caught as visions of Kaelin's past flashed before her eyes, battles, betrayals, centuries of solitude. It was a test not only of strength, but of love. Kaelin gritted his teeth, feeling the pressure of the curse against him. He called upon his centuries of knowledge, every spell, every ward he had ever learned, and shaped them with his will. Yet the true power came not from magic alone, but from the bond between him and Alara. Their hearts beat in unison, their hands joined, their thoughts intertwined. "Together," he said, voice rising above the roar of the storm. "We are stronger together." Alara nodded, her courage surging. "Together," she repeated. The vortex flared violently, shadows striking at them like living blades. Kaelin's magic collided with the darkness, flares of silver and gold lighting the hall. Alara focused her own energy, her small but determined presence a beacon within the chaos. Together they formed a circle of light, pushing back the encroaching shadows. Time stretched, the struggle lasting hours yet seeming like moments. Every surge of darkness brought doubt, every flash of magic demanded unwavering trust. Kaelin saw in Alara's eyes a courage that mirrored his own, a strength he had not expected in a mortal. And in him, she saw not a fearsome king of vampires, but a protector, a guide, and something far more, someone who would risk eternity to keep her safe. Then came the final test. The vortex pulsed one last time, more violent than before. The curse's voice whispered in ancient tones, cold and cruel, "One must fall or both perish. The bond cannot endure." Kaelin's eyes widened, fear and determination warring within him. He tightened his hold on Alara, anchoring himself to her presence. "No," he said firmly, "we will not be torn apart, not by magic, not by fate, not by fear." Alara's grip on his hand strengthened. "We face it together, always together." The shadows lashed at them one final time. Kaelin called forth all his strength, pouring every ounce of power and will into the circle of light they formed together. Alara's own courage added to the force, a purity that the curse had not anticipated. Light met darkness in a clash that shook the foundations of the palace, a moment where past, present, and fate collided. And then silence. The shadows vanished, dissipating like smoke carried away by the wind. The hall was bathed in a soft, golden light, the storm outside beginning to calm. The curse had been broken, not through sacrifice, but through unity, trust, and love. Both Kaelin and Alara stood, trembling but unbroken, their bond stronger than ever. Kaelin sank to one knee, holding Alara's hands in his. "It is over," he said, voice still rough from exertion. The curse, it has been broken, but it has left its mark on us in ways we cannot yet understand. Alara smiled faintly, her own exhaustion mirrored in her expression. We faced it and survived. Together, that is all that matters. The palace, though scarred from the battle, felt alive once more. Shadows no longer whispered threats, and the ancient walls seemed to breathe in relief. For the first time in centuries, Kalen felt something he had not thought possible: peace. And more than peace, he felt hope, fragile yet undeniable. Days passed, and life slowly returned to the palace. Kalen and Alara walked the halls, their bond evident in small gestures. A shared smile, a hand brushing against the other, quiet words spoken in the safety of private chambers. They trained together, learned together, and rebuilt trust not only in each other but in the world they now shared. Alara began to understand that she had changed. She was no longer the frightened, helpless woman who had been bound in chains. She was a force in her own right, capable of standing against darkness and facing challenges head-on. And in Kalen, she found not just protection but partnership, respect, and a deep, unspoken affection that grew with every shared moment. Kalen, too, had transformed. The centuries of solitude, the relentless pursuit of power and control, had given way to something new. He had learned to trust, to care, to love without fear of weakness. And in doing so, he had discovered a part of himself that had long been dormant, a humanity he had thought lost, awakened by the courage and presence of one mortal woman. One morning, as the first light of dawn broke across Ashendrel, Kalen and Alara stood on the balcony of the restored palace, looking out over the city. The mist had lifted, revealing streets gleaming in the new light, towers standing proud, and the distant mountains bathed in gold. The world felt renewed, alive, and full of possibility. "Alara," Kalen said softly, his voice carrying the weight of centuries and the tenderness of newfound emotion. "We have faced darkness, ancient magic, and the unknown, and yet we are here, together." She looked at him, eyes shining with trust and quiet joy. "Yes," she said. "Together, and no matter what comes, we will face it side by side." Kalen reached out, brushing a gentle hand across her cheek. "You have given me more than I could have imagined. Not just survival, not just companionship, but hope, love even." Alara smiled, a soft, radiant smile that lit even the shadows of the palace. "And you have given me strength, protection, and a place in a world I never knew I could belong to." The wind stirred, carrying whispers of the past, echoes of old curses, and the faint hum of magic that lingered in Ashendrel. But Kalen and Alara did not falter. They had faced the greatest test and emerged stronger, their bond unbreakable, their hearts aligned. As they embraced, the palace seemed to sigh in relief, the dark energy that had haunted it dissipating. The curse was gone, but the lessons remained. Trust, courage, and the power of unity could overcome even the most ancient and relentless forces. And yet, even in this moment of triumph, Kalen sensed a quiet truth. The world would always hold shadows, mysteries, and challenges. But for the first time, he was not alone. With Alara at his side, he knew that they could face whatever came together, as equals, as partners, and as something far greater than themselves.